All right, welcome everyone. I think we've still got a couple folks trickling in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Really great to see where folks are coming from. Feel free to, you know, introduce yourself and say where you're coming from in the chat. So I want to welcome everybody to our webinar, Wolves of the Wild. I'm Len Montgomery. I'm the Public Lands Campaign Director for Environment America. And I'm joined by two wolf lovers today. So my colleague from Environment America, Virginia Carter, and Environmental Actions, Julia Devito. And as I'm sure many of you know, wolves are an incredibly important and often misunderstood species. We grew up learning about the big bad wolf and other villains in fairy tales, but the truth is, wolves are the heroes of their ecosystems in a lot of ways. So this evening, we're going to spend about 20 minutes talking with our guests about wolves and the policies that can protect them. And then we'll open it up for questions from all of you. So you can put questions in the Q&A section or in the chat as you think of them, and we'll answer them when we get to that point. So to get things started off, I'm going to ask both of our panelists to introduce themselves. And I'm going to ask you both to tell us a little bit about your history working with and for wolves. So Virginia, let's start with you.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. As Len said, my name is Virginia Carter. I'm a campaign associate with Environment America. I first fell in love with wolves when I was very little. A family friend runs a wolf sanctuary in the mountains in Colorado. So I grew up visiting them and learning from them and learning how to interact with them. In high school and college, I spent my summers at the sanctuary living out of my tent. This experience really shaped the way I look at wolves. They're not these big, bad, scary beasts. Each wolf has a unique personality, and I learned that wolf behavior is very complex. They're also amazing at picking up on human emotions and forming relationships with people. So I have known wolves since they were puppies, actually these puppies that are fully grown now, and they still get super excited to see me every time I'm there. Unfortunately, when some people hear wolves, they think of, Red Riding Hood or the Three Little Pigs. And my hope is that through education and through the work we're doing at Environment America, this stigma will go away and people will see just how important they are for the planet.
Great. Thanks so much, Virginia. So Julia, let's hear from you.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Julia Devito, and as Len says, I work as an organizer with the group Environmental Action. I didn't grow up anywhere near a wolf sanctuary, but I also started pretty early getting involved in wolf conservation in high school, volunteering each summer with a conservation center near my home. After that, though, I went on to get my boots off the ground a little bit, studied biology, and ultimately got my master's in environmental science and policy. And since starting at Environmental Action, have helped to shepherd along the campaigns, helping to enact strong policies in states and nationwide to make sure that our wolves that are so important to our ecosystem and our planet are getting the protection that they need to survive and thrive.
Great. Thanks, Julia. So Virginia, my first question is for you. Tell us why wolves are so important for the ecosystem. You both mentioned that, but tell us a little bit more about how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. So wolves have a vital role in maintaining the balance of an ecosystem, and they do this through a process that's called a trophic cascade. Now, what a trophic cascade is, it's a ripple effect starting from the apex predator all the way down. And an apex predator is just the animal that is at the top of the food chain. They're the top predator, nothing's trying to eat them. And science has shown us that the apex predators like wolves and sharks and bears actually influence the entire ecosystem around them, not just what they're preying on, but everything down to the small fauna and flora. Previously, scientists were only able to study this phenomenon when an apex predator was removed from their environment. With wolves, scientists were actually able to study what happens when that apex predator is reintroduced to an area. And most of this research has been done in Yellowstone National Park. So what we saw in Yellowstone is that when wolves disappeared, the elk population skyrocketed and pushed the limits of the park's carrying capacity. Pretty much what that means is that there were more elk than is sustainable for that ecosystem. The elk started overgrazing the young aspen trees and the willow trees, and that affected every animal that relied on them, like the beavers and the birds and the burrowing animals. So another thing that happened is that elks were stagnant and they were just like compacting the soil and making it hard for things to grow. And they were also hanging out in places that they wouldn't be if wolves were present, like in wide open spaces and plains. So plants that weren't used to the presence of elk were just being trampled. And a cool discovery is that they found out is that elks, when they're being chased by wolves, they actually kick up the dirt and it aerates the soil, which makes plants grow better. So it like all has this effect. So scientists observed that the park's ecosystem was suffering due to a lack of wolves. And in 1995, they reintroduced wolves to the park. This is when they really got to see the relationship between the apex predator and the ecosystem, because they both saw what happened when wolves got taken out, and now they got to see what happened when wolves got reintroduced. And the presence of wolves managed the elk population. So now the trees were not being overgrazed. The trees got healthy again, which brought back the songbirds and the beavers, and it even had a positive effect on the fish population. So now if I can get the screen share to work, I will show you a little flow chart that demonstrates what I'm talking about. That is not the right one. There it is. Okay, so this is from the National Park Service, and where the green arrow is pointing up, that means populations are up, and where the red arrow is pointing down, that means populations are down. So you can just really clearly see when wolves, bears, cougar populations are up, the coyote and the elk populations are down. When the coyote population is down, small rodent population is up, which means the predatory bird population is up. When the elk population is down, the willow population is up, which means there's more bird diversity, which means there's more beavers. When there's more beavers, water flow is more abundant. When the elk population is down, the aspens are thriving, which means the cavity nesters birds their populations are up. Berry producing shrubs makes bird abundance. You know, when there's more elk carcasses, then the scavenger birds have something to eat. So this just kind of really illustrates what the trophic cascade is and how having more apex predators like the wolf really positively affects all of these species underneath it.
Great. That is, that's pretty neat. And then one fun fact that I learned, I think while we were setting up this webinar, is that wolves can literally affect the flow of a stream. So can you enlighten us about how that works?
Yeah, so that is pretty crazy. So it was a really cool discovery that was also made in Yellowstone. So we know that trees, specifically a strong root network, help the structure of a bank. And another consequence of overgrazing the trees is that the trees on the stream bank were dying out, and without that support, the banks were being eroded. The beaver population also comes into play here. So beavers are really like the stewards of the stream. And in 1995, when wolves were reintroduced, there was only one beaver colony left. Since wolves have been reintroduced, there are now 9 beaver colonies. The elk are not hanging around the streams. They're not overgrazing the trees. And the riverbanks are starting to become sturdy once again.
Great. Thanks, Virginia. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about kind of the history of what's been going on with wolves and what we've been doing to protect them. So Julie, I'm hoping you can give us a little history about, I think wolves nearly went extinct, how and why did that happen?
Absolutely. So it actually surprised me to learn when I first learned that wolves are native to every single state in the Union except Hawaii. From coast to coast in the lower 48 and up in Alaska, wolves are native to these areas, and they're once were populations no matter where you live in the country. If you're in the United States, you're on the historic range of wolves. So they were extremely plentiful. But unfortunately, in the early 20th century, people didn't really like that that was the case. We've already discussed some of the cultural narratives surrounding wolves that made people fearful of them. But it wasn't just that people disliked wolves and were shooting them and killing them for that reason. There was actually a federally driven bounty system. Wolves were intentionally exterminated across much of the lower 48 throughout the early 1900s. So unregulated hunting, those federal bounties and rewards for wolf pelts or photographic proof of killing wolves drove people to kill a truly astonishing and unsustainable number of them. And unfortunately, it's turned out that due to all of these efforts, wolves were exterminated from pretty much their entire historical range here. The only wolves that remained in the lower 48 were just a couple hundred of them remaining in the deep northern woods in Michigan and in Minnesota. So those few packs were really all that was left after this sort of decades-long elimination campaign went forth.
And then one of our favorite tools in the federal conservation toolkit is the Endangered Species Act. So tell us a little bit more about how that came into play to stop wolves from going extinct entirely.
Absolutely. So it didn't escape notice that wolves were almost completely gone. By the 60s and 70s, people were starting to realize that they were not going to be around much longer in the lower 48 if something wasn't done. And it was in 1978 that Canis lupus, the gray wolf, as a whole unit, was listed for protection under the Endangered Species Act. So this was great. This outlawed hunting. It outlawed any kind of illegal take, as they say, so harassing or killing wolves in any way. And wolves were pretty resilient and began to bounce back just as soon as we stopped killing them so much. So that wolf population that I mentioned in sort of the northern Great Lakes region began to expand again. After a while, some wolves naturally crossed the border from Canada back down into Montana, into Washington in the Northwest. As Virginia already mentioned, wolves were reintroduced by us into Yellowstone National Park. And by the late 2010s, just a couple of years ago, the US population of wolves had grown into the thousands. Estimates range somewhere from the 4,000 to 6,000 range across these several populations in a couple of US states.
And that is why we like the Endangered Species Act so much. But Virginia, tell us a little bit more about obviously the wolves didn't know they were protected under the Endangered Species Act. So how do they recover from extinction? What is it about, wolves and their behavior that does help them recover when we stop hunting them?
Yeah, so wolves have been proven to be very resilient. And as Julia just mentioned, like they bounced back from near extinction before. They're actually better at recovering than any other endangered species. And this has to do with a couple of reasons. One is their social dynamics. So they're what we consider social carnivores. They are family based. So they look out for each other, they rely on each other. It's really that pack mentality that fosters strong and successful growth. They work together to hunt. A lone wolf probably wouldn't be able to take on an elf, but a pack can't, an elk, not an elf. I don't know why I said that, but a pack can take on an elk. So like a lone wolf in the wild is going to have a lot harder time than a wolf that has a pack behind them. They also work together to protect their territory and to keep each other safe. They work together to raise their young. It's worth noting that there's also only one breeding pair in the pack. So the alpha male and the alpha female are the ones having pups, and then the rest of the pack helps raise them and keep them safe. Even though there's only one wolf that gives birth, they are relatively quick at reproduction. They give birth every spring and can have a litter with up to 9 pups, although the average litter size is about 4 pups. And then those pups grow up and help take care of the next generation until it's time for them to go out and find their own pack. So that is really one reason. Another reason is that they're highly territorial. They're top predators, so they don't have to worry that much about being hunted, and can focus, other than people hunting them, but so they can really focus on maintaining the fort and strengthening the pack. That being said, if they need to leave an area, they can. Wolves are terrific dispensers, which means they can travel really long distances. Wolves have been recorded moving 550 miles in just 7 months. This is actually how the very first wolf came back to the US before there were reintroduction efforts. She just walked across the border from Canada. And then obviously to do a full introduction, we had to bring more in. We can't repopulate with just one wolf, but she came across on her own. And this is also what we're seeing in Colorado. A pack just came in on its own. So one of the last reasons I want to highlight is that they're very adaptable. And this is like a really big reason why they bounce back. It wouldn't be much use if they could only travel long distances, and then when they reach their destination, they couldn't figure out how to survive in their new home. That wouldn't work. So wolves are highly adaptable, which is great for conservation efforts because they can transplant a pack in an area and they will most likely learn how to survive. They're also what is called habitat generalists. This means that we have wolves in the Arctic, but they can also live in temperate forests. Like Julia said, we had them all over the US, and the US has lots of different climates. So wolves are really adaptable and can live a lot of places. So all of these things, like the pack dynamic, good at reproduction, territorial, but also being great at dispersal and being highly adaptable, all these things in conjunction with each other is really important for the bounce back of the population and why we've seen such success in the past.
All right, so wolves are set up to, sort of naturally, once they're not being hunted and killed in large numbers, to kind of adapt and reintroduce themselves. We had the endangered species protection. But now here we are. Wolves are in trouble again. So, Julia, what happened? When were protections removed, and what have been the consequences of that?
So ever since wolves were listed in 1978, there actually has been kind of a shifting patchwork in a couple of different states. So up until October of 2020, in specific states, wolves had already been delisted. So for example, in Idaho and Montana, they lost their protections in 2011. In Wyoming, they lost their protections in 2017. In Washington and in Oregon, half the state was federally protected and the other half was not. Wolves were delisted and then relisted in the Great Lakes region in 2011 and 2014, I think, respectively. But the big one, the thing that we really are worried about right now, and the thing we need to be working on changing as quickly as possible, is that in October of 2020, the Trump administration removed federal protection for all gray wolves in all the lower 48 states. So that means that states were able to kind of take over their own wolf regulations and do things like hold hunts or allow wolf killing if they wanted to. The most immediately devastating consequence was that Wisconsin held its first wolf hunt in many years. And that first hunt, held since they lost the national protections, resulted in 218 wolves being killed in just under 72 hours, which blew right past the quota they had set of 119 wolves. I think it ended up something like 1 in 5 wolves in the state that were killed in just that short time. So protections are lost, the first hunt in the state occurs, and already this extremely significant portion of the population is gone just like that. So it just goes to show that without the strong federal protection of the Endangered Species Act, that states are poised to make some pretty irresponsible decisions about managing their wolf packs.
Thanks for that. So we are getting we're getting questions left and right from all quarters. So I want to open up to our audience to ask questions. So there's a Q&A option down at the bottom where you can ask questions. And then I've also been tracking that there's some in the chat. So Julie, I think this one is for you. How many states have wolf populations? And then can you tell us a little bit about where they're allowed to be hunted?
Sure. So in the lower 48 states, there are wolves in Alaska as well, but they're in less trouble. There's way more of them up there. Down here, with the population that we're concerned about, we have wolves in Wisconsin, in Minnesota, and in Michigan, in the Great Lakes region. Then up in Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana, kind of in the Rocky Mountains. And then in the Northwest, we've got Oregon, Washington wolves, also a couple of wolves in California, but they're just a handful of individuals, maybe one pack or two, if I recall, just sort of wandering south. And then, as Virginia mentioned, we do actually have one wolf pack in Colorado now as well. Some dispersers moving through and hopefully taking up residence. But of those, the states that have either legal wolf killing in some capacity or a regulated trophy hunt are Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and now Wisconsin, as I just mentioned.
Thanks, Julia. And then, so there's a couple questions that all kind of boil down to what can be done. So what can be done about the wolf hunts in Idaho and Wyoming? What is the Biden administration doing? What can be done about the wolves being lured out of Yellowstone? So I think that's those are several questions, but they all kind of boil down to what can we do? What can be done on the state level? What can be done on the federal level to help the wolves?
Sure. So I'll say again that the most important thing we can do is get that federal Endangered Species Act relisting. That is just the single most powerful and proven tool that we have to allow them to thrive and be safe. So we are working hard on convincing the Biden administration to do that. I think Environmental Action has sent in something like 40,000 comments to them. I know Environment America has some number added up on that too. But that is sort of the one fell swoop that we're aiming for, because if we can get those federal protections back, then individual states will no longer have the power to enact these hunts or allow wolf killing in a way that's not compatible with their survival. So we're hard at work on that. But in the meantime, we also want to make sure that states are managing their wolves responsibly. So I know I can speak only for Environmental Action and some things we've worked on. There are, since delisting, or in states where wolves were delisted earlier, various state laws and regulations have been proposed. Like in Idaho, they tried to mark out some wolf-free zones in the state where they were going to try to extirpate them completely. Montana recently tried to change a bunch of their wolf-related laws, allowing new means of trapping and hunting. If you live in those states, or even if you care about wolves and live outside them and still want to reach out, you can contact those state governments or those state governors and let them know that you don't want to see it. So working on individual pieces of legislation is one thing you can do if there is a state where active kind of wolf-related policy is being made. The other thing that we've done is called on governors in states like Wisconsin, where wolf hunts are spinning up again for the first time, and urging them to defer that, delay that, and reevaluate their wolf management plans, to basically take the possibility of holding trophy hunts off the books completely. Hopefully that is a good summary, Len.
Yeah. Thank you, Julia.
There's a lot.
There's a couple specific questions about Yellowstone, which I'm not sure if either of you is fully versed in what's happening in Yellowstone, but if you are and can share, otherwise I think we can probably get that information out to folks later.
I can touch on it a little bit. So as you know, wolves inside of Yellowstone are they're protected. You can't hunt inside Yellowstone. But since wolves have been federally delisted, there have been quite a few inhumane and kind of frankly unsportsmanlike practices that have been taking place. And that includes snares and leg trapping, and actually being allowed to lure wolves using meat. So either luring them into a trap or luring them into a space where it's legal to kill a wolf. And so this is already having really bad consequences. In just the last 2 months of 2021, 20 Yellowstone wolves were killed, 15 of which were just over the Montana border, where there used to be a very low quota on the Montana border that Montana said, if they're right outside of the park, but in our state, you can only kill this many a year. They have since repealed that. So now you can kill as many Yellowstone wolves as you want. You can lure them out of the park with meat and then trap them and then kill them. So it's not looking good for the Yellowstone wolves at this moment. If these practices are allowed to continue, there are less than 100 now left in Yellowstone.
So I think the answer there is a combination of, if you're in Montana or know anyone in Montana, call every elected official that you can possibly find in Montana. And then I think someone asked, so as Julia said, we're, both Environment America and Environmental Action have been, turning in, petitions and doing various other things to make sure the Fish and Wildlife Service and Department of Interior hear how important this is. We're asking Secretary Holland to use her powers to do basically an emergency relisting, and then calling your U.S. senators and members of Congress and asking them to put additional, kind of bring their voices to bear on the Department of Interior, will also help make a difference. We know that there are some friends of wolves in Congress who are also, working and calling on them to be to be relisted. So let's see. And then we've got a lot of interesting questions. So I guess questions about what is driving wolf hunting? Is it about trophy hunting? What's kind of, to the extent we can get behind, get into the motivations of people who are, who are hunting or killing wolves. Is there anything driving that we can try to influence or, or work on through education?
I can try to speak to this one, I think.
Please do.
Part of it, I think, is still just the historical conception of wolves as pests and as dangers to ourselves or to our pets or to our animals. I can also speak from a little bit of personal experience. Back when wolves were about to be delisted, I did fly up to Brainerd, Minnesota, to the Fish and Wildlife Service hearing that was going on to submit a public comment. And over the course of that hearing, heard from people who were advocating against the delisting and also people who were throwing their hat in the ring on the side of saying that wolves should be delisted. And from that, I can say that it's a lot of people who make their livelihood off of livestock ranching and farming. And there is still a pervasive impression among these people that in order to protect their animals and protect their livelihoods, that they need to have the option to be able to kill a wolf or to use lethal deterrent on wolves in order to prevent them from harming their animals. Now, what you and I probably might both know is that there are many measures you can take short of shooting a wolf to deter them from harming your livestock. So there are certainly educational opportunities there to get into those communities and discuss different ways and options that you can use to coexist with wolves without having to resort immediately to just being given the permission to hunt them.
Great. Thanks, Julia. So then let's see. Are there any documentaries, films, media campaigns that you guys have seen and liked that could be spread farther to educate the public and help change the narrative about wolves?
I think I saw one shouted out in the chat earlier. There's a video I think it's called How the Wolves Saved Yellowstone. That is a really good overview on the story that Virginia told us earlier, with going into a little bit more detail about that whole just really amazing tale of how powerful the presence of wolves in the landscape can be.
So then here's a Virginia, you may be the person, maybe both of you know the answer to this. The Western US has experienced a high level of severe forest fires. We've had a lot of fires out west. How well do wolves adapt to areas post-fire?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's like specific studies on post-fire specifically, but like I said earlier, wolves are really adaptable. They have been in all of our states where, you know, some more desert landscapes, they've survived there. So as long as there's a food source and not everything died, then they're probably gonna do well.
All right, so then let's see, here's one. So in Europe, I've heard that sheep herding is one way to contain wolves. And then also, what about wolves as balancers to a habitat's general ecology as predators? Do we know about the sheep herding, the European sheep herding rumor?
I can't speak to that specifically. I know that there are kinds of sheepdogs that are born and bred to be wolf deterrents. They'll, you know, keep track of a flock and bark and growl and go after a wolf to scare them off. What I do know is that when it comes to keeping livestock contained in areas near wolves, something as simple as tying a fluttery flag to the fence around the side of where the animals are kept can spook a wolf off. They're pretty fearful of novel things and of movements sometimes. So you can try some pretty simple stuff to keep wolves from hunting on your land.
And then wolves are, have been portrayed, as we've talked about, in folklore. And then I think, some of the fear stoking is, that they are aggressive toward humans. Is this accurate at all?
No. To elaborate, wolves, they rarely attack humans. In fact, there's not been a single person killed by wolves in North America for the past century. And attacks are few and far between. The main reason a wolf will attack is that it's provoked. So don't provoke a wolf. Another is if it's rabid. But fortunately, the prevalence of rabies is decreasing. And wolves are also really smart. So they understand that they're top predators, humans are top predators. And if we got into an altercation, that they could be hurt or killed. So they avoid humans. And their senses are incredible. So they do a really good job at avoiding humans. Wolves' strongest sense is their sense of smell, which is roughly 100 times more powerful than that of a human. Under the right conditions, a wolf can smell something up to a mile away. And if that wasn't enough, their hearing is also excellent. Under the right conditions, wolves can hear a howl as far as 6 miles away in the forest and 10 miles away on an open tundra. So the bottom line is the wolf is going to sniff you out long before you spot it, and it's going to stay far away from you. This idea of the big bad wolf is really just a myth used to sell fairy tales.
All right, so then there's a couple different questions, and Julia, you've spoken a little bit to sort of the tension with ranchers, but does what kind of programs exist in states where there is kind of active wolf management or wolf reintroduction to compensate ranchers for lost cattle or sheep? What kind of basically what systems already exist, and then what can we do to kind of educate and get more ranchers on board with protecting wolves and reintroducing them in places?
Sure. So it does vary from state to state, but in many states where there are active wolf populations or bigger wolf populations, the state natural resources department will in fact reimburse farmers in cases where it can be proven that wolves were indeed responsible for the death of an animal. So that is something that can be useful, at least as a, conciliatory measure when someone is being impacted by wolves. The better thing to do, though, in my opinion, is another program that many states do also to some degree have, which is to use state resources from, even up to and including like even sending out range riders to help ranchers and other livestock operators install wolf deterrents on their land and prevent those depredations from happening in the first place. So state governments can do a lot to collaborate with ranchers as long as ranchers are willing to cooperate to provide the resources they need to try different methods of wolf deterrence and figure out what's going to work on their land for their operation. And hopefully get to a place where the wolves and the ranching operations can coexist. Although some might say too that the price of doing business when you're in wolf country is that occasionally one of them might snack on one of your animals. They're out there. So nothing saying that even with all of these interventions that it's ever going to be possible to completely prevent wolf attacks on livestock unilaterally across the nation. But that's not to say that a productive coexistence is completely impossible either.
Okay, and then we've touched a little bit on the topic of reintroduction, and Virginia and I are both in Colorado, where the voters, we actually voted to reintroduce wolves. That's not supposed to happen until 2023, but as Virginia said, a wolf pack reintroduced itself to Colorado over the last year. So Virginia, can you briefly tell us how reintroduction works, and maybe explain to me why the wolves didn't get the memo and just came in on their own?
Oh yeah. So like I said before, wolves can travel really long distances. So they don't really follow a mitigation plan or a management plan. They can't read a map or say, yes, I'll stay here. They're going to go where they want to go. And like I said before, being adaptable is really helpful for reintroduction. So while we had a pack just come over, we are still planning on reintroducing them. We can do that in a couple ways. We can transplant a pack, and it's likely to do really well in their new territory. Notice I said pack. Now this was found out by trial and error, but reintroduction works best when dealing with an already established pack. This goes back to how the pack mentality helps them survive and thrive. If the wolves were strangers to each other, they would most likely separate from the group and get picked off one by one. Now that's another issue with reintroduction. If you do what's called a hard introduction, meaning you transport the wolves, you drop them in a new area and let them loose, they're likely to be like, okay, I'm gonna go home. Like I can walk. They're gonna try and walk back to wherever they came from. So instead, what has had a lot of success is called a soft introduction. And this uses an acclimation pen, which is just a large pen in the new environment where the wolves stay ranging from a couple weeks to a couple months. And then one day the gate is left open and they can leave, and then the pen is removed completely. And this method of getting them used to the area has shown a lot of success.
Great, thanks. So I just answered this in the chat, but a couple people have asked. We will have the recording of this webinar up on Environment America's YouTube, and then on both Environmental Action and Environment America Facebook pages. So we'll send a follow-up email out with links, and can also share the chart that Virginia put up earlier, so that folks can use that. So we've got just a couple minutes left here. I think we can take a couple more questions, but also wanted to make sure that Virginia and Julia, that you can both put your email addresses into the chat, so people that have unanswered questions can shoot you a note to follow up. So if you guys want to do that, I will I'll field a couple other questions. So what kind of hurdles are we facing with the current administration in terms of getting wolves relisted under the Endangered Species Act? I think the biggest hurdle is just and you guys can also speak to this, but the biggest hurdle is just the process time. So the Fish and Wildlife Service has started the process to consider for relisting, but the federal government doesn't, and the agencies just don't move that quickly. There are processes, there are public comment periods, there's drafts and various things, and generally that works pretty well. But in the case of the wolves, we do think that an emergency relisting is in order. They're being killed quickly, and this process is taking a while. So I think that is actually the biggest hurdle that we're facing now, is that the process that we'd normally, that we normally use is just a little bit slower. But Julia or Virginia, if you've got anything else to say on that.
I think that's pretty much it. I will say, though, that for all that the wheels turn pretty slowly and the process is sort of an incremental one, we do have some good news on the potential for federal relisting in the form of, I believe the status of the Rocky Mountain population of wolves specifically is now once again under review by the Fish and Wildlife Service, which means they are formally considering relisting them with endangered species protections. So that is certainly a step in the right direction, and goes to show that while the process might be slow, it does move and might be going the right way.
And then another question, what kind of volunteer opportunities can folks look for if they want to help wolves? So what can people be doing or looking for?
Yeah, so someone just put in the chat if they could get phone numbers and call scripts. So that's definitely something that we could send out to everyone. We don't have them written at the moment, but those can definitely go out in the next week or so. So that's a great way to get involved, is if you live in a state that has high kill quotas or any kill quotas or inhumane trapping or luring practices, definitely calling your representatives and letting them know this is not something you stand behind. Also signing our petition. I will put that in the chat right now. If you follow that link, that's just asking Secretary Deb Haaland to give them emergency protections while the Fish and Wildlife decides if they're going to relist them. Aside from that, there's a lot of wolf sanctuaries and a lot of the Midwest, especially if you live in this area, that if you have a longer commitment, if you have a couple weeks to dedicate your time to, they're always looking for help. A lot of them are always looking for funding. But yeah, really just like making your voices heard, writing letters to the editor if you live in a state where there's wolf hunting, letting people know that you don't support this.
All right. Then Julia, any other or Virginia, any parting thoughts, things that folks on this webinar can be doing, resources that they can be looking into, or anything else to wrap us up?
I think Virginia pretty much said it with that last bit in terms of what to do next, but I just want to thank everyone for coming out. This has been a lot of fun.
Yep. So thank you so much. I think this has been great. As I said, we'll get all of this up. We'll get a follow-up email out with petition links and links to the video and phone numbers and call scripts. Please, everyone who attended, many of you have probably taken multiple actions to protect the wolves, but please continue continue to sign the petitions, make the phone calls, donate to groups that are in this fight. We need all of you if we're going to protect the wolves. So thanks everybody so much for joining us, and have a great night.
Thank you guys.